Hello. Hello. I hope you can hear me okay on Facebook and on IG. And say hi if you're joining us live. As always, feel free to comment, let us know your experiences. Just generally join in on the discussion. This is not me giving a lecture. Although I do get preachy sometimes when I get really passionate about things. But I'm okay with that. But you can still give your thoughts and share your experiences. It's always nice to know from clinicians and anyone else watching what your thoughts are. So say hi and let's have a discussion about this. So today we're talking about leadership as clinicians. So being leaders in our practices, in our profession, in our field. So it's going to be a really interesting discussion. Okay, awesome. So I'm just going to wait a minute or so in case anyone still wants to join us live. Hopped on a bit early today. And I hope that you will be joining us at the workshop. We are starting on Monday, so Monday the 8th, and we're going through to July 13th. So it's a full week from Monday to Saturday. And essentially you'll be working on something that's important to you. So we all get to choose our own goal that we're working on, our own, we call it like a growth goal or an improvement goal, something that you want to get better at or improve on, something that you want different in your life or in your career. Sometimes that's an area of discomfort. Sometimes it's like a yearning for something different in your career or your life. And you get to work on that specific thing. And basically how we'll do it is every day you'll receive an audio lesson. And so you'll listen to that lesson. There are prompts in that lesson that you'll answer in a private Facebook community that is specifically for this workshop. And in that community, I'll be giving feedback on your answers to the prompts because I'm guiding you through a kind of tool that you can also use beyond this workshop as well, which is really awesome. So you get to take it with you. But yeah, you're essentially learning how to use this tool really effectively in the workshop. So I'll be giving feedback, I'll be coaching in the Facebook group. And at the end of the week, we'll have a 2-hour Zoom call where we are doing any final coaching. I'm answering any final questions you have about the process that came up or anything that came up just in general from doing this work together during the week. So it's going to be a really fun week. It's going to be us working on our growth together and you're really doing it in an environment that's supported and doing it with fellow clinicians as well. It is open to non-clinicians as well, but mainly it's going to be healthcare providers in there. And yes, so I really hope I see you at the workshop. We're starting on Monday, so you can either message me, or I think what I'll actually do is just send the link, or what do you call it, post the link as one of the comments on this video as well. Then it's easy access for you. So this could be one of the things you're working on in the workshop next week. So cultivating that sense of leadership in your practice, in your field, in your profession. But even if you're not joining us at the workshop, I hope that this discussion today is going to really inspire you to really be a leader. And I will go into why that is. Awesome. Okay, cool. So I'd like to know, especially if you are joining us live, let me know what comes to mind when you think of leadership, or when you think of a leader, what comes to mind? What kind of, let's say, personality traits or behaviors or vibes do you get from the word leadership? And I'll share mine. At least previously, I definitely had this idea that leadership was about being quite sort of loud and dominating and male. That's the image that comes to my mind. Very strong opinions, And I was none of these things. So I never really ever considered myself as, or I never even considered the possibility that I might be a leader. I thought in order to be a leader, I would need to cultivate at least one of those things. And so I hope that this encourages you too, that actually you don't need to be any of those things to be a leader. And I think the world also needs more people who are, quieter, who are sensitive, and deep thinkers. We need more of those kinds of people as leaders. And I think often clinicians are all of these things. So if you are quieter, you're a deep thinker, you're a sensitive soul, I want to encourage you that you can also be a leader. You don't have to be all dominating and opinionated and even male. So especially to my female clinicians. Okay, awesome. So on that, there are a few descriptions that people might use for this idea. This idea generally that we can be both warm and strong. So that is from Samara Bay. She calls it strength and warmth. So think about it as like having two dials. You have a strength dial and you have a warmth dial. And you want, hey Lily, you have a strength dial and you have a warmth dial, and you can turn both of these up. And you'll be kind of gauging how much strength and how much warmth you need. We're chatting about leadership. So we can have those together, right? Strength and warmth. That's what we want as leaders. Brene Brown puts it as a strong back and a soft front. Priya Parker puts this as generous authority. I love that term, generous authority. We can be authoritative, but be generous and compassionate. The other way to put this, and this, I think this is awesome for healthcare providers particularly, but we learn do no harm. First, do no harm. But I want you to encourage you to look at the other side of that. So do no harm, but take no shit. So it's just this idea that we can have warmth and strength together. We don't have to pick one. And we certainly don't have to only be strong in order to be leaders. So I want to read you a few descriptions of leaders. So Brene Brown again, love her, in case you haven't noticed with all my lives. A leader is someone who takes responsibility for finding the potential in people and in processes, and has the courage to develop that potential. Hey Mickey, we're talking about leadership as clinicians. So finding potential in people and processes and having the courage to develop that potential. So I'm sure in your career, in your field, in your practice, you can see certain potential in your patients, in colleagues, in some of the messed up systems and processes that we have that you might want to shift. Better Up describes leaders as people who inspire passion and motivation, someone with a vision and creates a path to realizing that. And a leader is someone who ensures that their team has support and tools to achieve their goals. So other ideas include things like a leader goes first, right? We are thinking of this idea of being a model rather than a martyr. So how can you be the person that models the things that you are talking about to your patients, to your colleagues, to the other people in your field? How can you go first? You model something, you set the tone, right? Leaders have vision and creativity. They're willing to take risks and challenge the way that things currently are, so challenge the status quo. Another description is the role of a leader is to coach, guide, and inspire others. Okay, so now that we have a few descriptions and a few ideas about leadership, and specifically that it's not just dominating and loud and male. Let's think about this as in our practices with patients, just one-on-one with patients, right? If we take some of these descriptions, how can we apply this to patient care, right? So maybe we are looking at how can I inspire and motivate my patient to follow their, oh shame, Facebook isn't going well. Love that. Thanks for joining us on here, Mickey. find a way. Okay, so setting the tone for the treatment, right? So you are setting the tone. You are, I want to say, like, showing the patient how this is going to go. And I don't mean that in just like a, again, like bulldozing over it and like, this is how things have to be. But think about the idea of like a patient being really inappropriate, or a patient, this is a common thing with introverts, thinking that the fact that you're so quiet and you don't talk is like awkward or something like that, right? Like, what if you were the leader, you set the tone, like, this is how things are, and you were so kind of confident and secure in that that set the whole kind of vibe and tone of the practice, right? So boundaries, things like guidelines, those provide a lot of clarity for patients. Authority is really generous. And I think that's really important for us to think about, because we don't think about things like boundaries, things like authority. We don't think of that as generous. We think of it as like, oh, that's going to be mean, or that's going to be selfish. But think about it for yourself, right? Like, if you go to a healthcare provider, of course you don't want like the extreme in the one direction, right? Of course you don't want that healthcare provider that's like completely bulldozing over what you want, that they're not even trying to listen to your concerns, that they don't care about how you want things to go or what you need from them, right? Someone who is like all salesy and like is willing to BS their way through this in order to make the most money out of you, like, ugh, right? Like, no one wants that in a healthcare provider, of course. We want someone who is warm and listens to us. But think about also the completely opposite extreme of this, right? So think about the clinician, and maybe this is you, this is definitely me, so there's no shame in this. But just think about the complete opposite. You likely, as when you think of yourself being the patient, you likely don't want the opposite extreme in a healthcare provider either. You likely don't want to go to a healthcare provider who doesn't seem particularly interested one way or another. They kind of just leave you to your own decisions. You know, you try and ask them what you should do, and they're just like, well, you know, it's up to you. They don't particularly seem like interested or inspired about what they're doing. They don't get excited about talking about what they do or talking about the care plan, or you know, talking about the goals that you're going to be working on. They don't get like fired up about that, and they're just always very unsure of themselves, and they almost like expecting you as the patient to kind of lead this whole interaction, right? Like, that's also not great as the patient. So think of this idea of generous authority. Again, that goes back to that idea of being strong and kind, having a strong back and a soft heart, soft front. Hey, Dave. We're talking about leadership as clinicians, in clinicians. Okay, so if you think about those two opposite extremes, right? We don't want the dominating, bulldozing, doesn't listen to a word that you say kind of healthcare professional. And we also don't want the very like timid, doesn't really give you an answer one way or another, doesn't really seem that bothered about what you do or don't do, doesn't seem particularly interested or inspired about what they're doing, and is too scared to, you know, charge you for the treatments or encourage you to keep seeing them when you genuinely do need to be seeing them. But we want to be perfect. We want to be somewhere in between, right? And again, going back to that combination. So we want to be led and we want to be supported and feel safe. But this can come with being compassionate and collaborating on a plan, listening, even selling, which we think of as like this gross thing, mostly because our association is people selling things that people don't actually need and are just, as I said, like trying to get the maximum amount of money out of this person. But think about selling something that you genuinely believe in. Like, if you genuinely think that XYZ is the best thing ever for that patient, like, why wouldn't you want to be excited about that and tell them about it and encourage them to do that, right? Like, selling doesn't have to be unethical. It doesn't have to be pushing something people don't want on them, like taking away their own autonomy. It can genuinely be being of service, right? So all of these things can combine the ideas of like not being that bulldozer and not being too kind of timid and meek, but finding that in between of that generous authority and that warm and strong. So that's an example of, or some examples of how we can be leaders in our own practices, one-on-one with patients. The other idea of where we can be leaders is more in a general sense, like in your profession or your field. So I'd love to know from you guys, right? What is the one thing or one of the things that you would love to be different about your, maybe it's your profession, maybe it is your whole field, maybe it's humans in general, I don't know. So maybe that's in the way that patients are treated, right? Maybe that's what's expected of healthcare professionals, like the standards that we uphold. Maybe it's the norm about what we charge. Maybe it's how we treat each other as fellow healthcare professionals. Maybe it's how we are kind of nice, even if our patients are inappropriate or rude, right? Again, going back to like what expectations there are on us as healthcare professionals. But whatever it is for you, let's share that. Like, what is the one thing for you that you would want to be different about your profession or your field? And then let me ask you, what if you led this change? What if you were the one that started this movement and inspired other people to join? Like that whole idea of being the change that you want to see, like what is stopping you from being that? Because I think a lot of the time we talk about these things, we want things to be different, we might even leave the profession or the field because of these problems, but we might not necessarily think of ourselves as, or we might never even consider the option of being the person that actually changes that. And I don't mean single-handedly. Obviously, we're not trying to like change the world just by ourselves. We can have support and we can have, you know, other people with us in this movement. But you can be the one that starts that. You can be the leader of that movement, of that change. And I want to encourage you that anything that you think is specific to your personality that is just doesn't allow you to do that, I'm going to call BS on that, okay? So kind of like we were talking about earlier, you don't have to be loud, you don't have to be domineering, you don't have to be any of those things. You can be sensitive, you can be quiet, you can be a deep thinker, and you can still be a leader. Okay, so what are the skills other than courage that we might need to build, right? So it might be things like storytelling, being able to tell a story in a way that inspires and motivates others. Maybe it's empathy or other forms of communication that would help you be a leader. So coaching, mentoring, guiding someone. Our listening skills, right? Being a leader requires really good listening skills, really, really good listening skills. Listening to understand. A strong sense of self. I think this is so important because of all the things that we're thinking of that a leader might do. We need such a strong sense of self. If you are going to, let's say, set the tone for your treatment, or you're going to inspire a new movement in your profession, right? You need to be really secure in your own sense of self. You can't be relying on other people's validation. You can't be, and part of the reason that we can't be relying on other people's validation is because we might be the only person doing this. We might be, because we're going in front, there isn't a whole bunch of people in front of us, you know, saying, well done, you're on the right path, right? We might be completely alone in that. So having a very strong sense of self, And we are also way more likely to get feedback. We're way more likely to see mistakes and failures as opportunities to learn and grow and become even better leaders because of it. If we have that strong sense of self, that we're not going to crumble if people don't like us or we get criticized. So I think developing that strong sense of self is really, really important. And I think that's not just to be a leader, right? That's just in general, that's going to give you such a more fulfilling and mentally peaceful life and career. So it's worth working on whether or not you even have an idea to be a leader or not. What else do I want to say? Okay, so those were the kind of general ideas and maybe some ways that we could apply that to us in practice. There is also, I'll share that in the comments as well. There is an assessment that you can do. This is also, again, from Brené Brown, and it's called the Daring Leadership Assessment. So she assesses on things like vulnerability, trust, how much you live according to your values, how much you essentially rise again after like setbacks or negative emotions, all of that. So you can also find it on the daretolead.brenebrown.com website /assessment. But yeah, like I said, I'll put it in the comments. So you can go and assess where your leadership is. And you can it'll assess you on all those different points as well. So you can see exactly where you might need to lean into, where you might need to grow in when it comes to your own leadership. So feel free to discuss as well in the comments on what you found in that assessment. For example, for me, the biggest one that I need to work on is being willing to be vulnerable. And she also puts it as like, that is the foundation for all others. So it's really important. So that was interesting for me to see where that was. And I found a lot of the statements that you are rating really interesting. It also just gives you a general sense of what it means to be a leader. So I hope this has encouraged you to be a leader in your everyday, like in the most ordinary way, in your everyday practice life. This doesn't have to be this big like fireworks display of courage that you're doing in order to be a leader. We can be a leader in our everyday lives, even in our own relationships, our lives outside of work. Right, so I hope I've inspired you to do that. And then also, if you feel moved to do that, being part of bigger change, whether that's in your profession or your field, or like I say, just general humans. So I just thought one of the things that I feel that I would want changed in healthcare in general, maybe the world in general, is that we bring more of our humanity to our work. So we as healthcare professionals, our patients are encouraged to do that as well. And yeah, so just thinking for me, like how I can lean even more, because that's been something I'm working on a lot, is like how I can be an example of someone who is bringing their humanity to their work. And I think thinking about how as a clinician you might do that, right? And again, this goes back to like, you are setting the tone, you are leading, right? Even if your patient is like confused by the fact that you're being like a human, you can still be that person that shows them like, hey, yes, I'm a clinician and I can show up as a human. And your patients will be so grateful for that, because it gives them permission to show up as actual humans themselves. So that's just an example of something you may want to take into your practice as well, into your career. But thinking about what changes you'd like to see in practice, in your career, in your field, and thinking about how you can actually lead that, how you can, kind of guide that movement and go first. And we'll be cheering you on the whole way from this community. Thank you for listening, and I hope I'll see you at the workshop next week, starting Monday. So excited for that. And I will chat to you guys soon. Bye.